Welcome, and thanks for joining us today for our 45th episode of the Restaurant Dealmaker Show, where we discuss pertinent topics regarding the food and beverage industry with industry professionals. My guest co-host today is Dennis Berkowitz, the former owner-operator of 15 well-known restaurants in the San Francisco Bay Area. Originally from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Dennis started on his career path early by helping his father, who was also in the restaurant business. Dennis was dipping ice cream by the time he could reach the ice cream cabinet, and he got that restaurant bug, and his ambitions didn't end with ice cream. He graduated from Michigan State University in 1961 with a degree in restaurant management, and then served in the military as a lieutenant and managed the Fort McNair Officers Club in Washington, D.C. Hotels were the next phase of Dennis's career. He worked in Boston at the Hotel Corporation of America, now the Sonesta International Hotels Corporation. And in 1967, he was recruited across the country by Richard Swig, the chairman of the Fairmont Hotel Management Company in San Francisco. After 5 years as the vice president of Food and Beverage Director at Fairmont, Dennis caught the eye of the Hyatt Corporation and became vice president of Food and Beverage at 29, helping design and develop close to 200 restaurants. It wasn't until 1978 that Dennis switched gears and opened the first Max's Son restaurant in Daly City and named the restaurant after his father, Max. He'd been successful at his job at Hyatt, and so he thought he might as well be successful for himself. This restaurant was named after himself, but was also a tribute to his father and had a nice ring to it. The company took off, and the second Max's restaurant, Max's Opera Cafe, opened in San Francisco, and the restaurant featured singing servers and high-end delicatessen bistro food, which was unique for the time and place. Dennis stated that this restaurant put him on the map as it was a very edgy restaurant at the time. It fit a niche that wasn't in San Francisco. Max's restaurants were intended to offer customers large portions of high-quality comfort food for reasonable prices, and the fare is delicatessen-based, but done in style, and the restaurants also serve as a fun, casual atmosphere. Dennis has left an impact on the Max's menu itself by having menu items named after family, friends, and even his doctors over the years. There's one sandwich named for United States Representative Jackie Spear, a Democrat in San Mateo, a family friend who also officiated his son's wedding. So without further ado, I'm going to start the conversation with Dennis by asking him the first question, which I'm going to modify somewhat, since I guess his restaurant career began by scooping ice cream. But the first question would be, what was the real first food and beverage job you had, other than the ice cream job, and in the industry?
Was in a delicatessen called Solomon's. It was an iconic restaurant in Shaker Heights in Cleveland. And Sidney Solomon taught me the business. And he taught me how to carve. I was the best turkey carver he ever saw. So he made me a counterman where I would make 3-ounce corned beef sandwiches. I got the idea of big portions, quite frankly. And every summer we used to go to Atlantic City. And on the boardwalk, there are these restaurants, and they had huge portions at the window, big lemon rind pies. So I got my portion, my portion regimen by when I was very, very young in Atlantic City. So that's how I started. And then I graduated to a restaurant in Akron, Ohio, in my senior year in high school called Giacomini's. It's now called Papa Joe's. And I was the only waiter in the restaurant, because it was only waitresses. And because I was only 18 years old, I served their desserts and they served my liquor. So I had a wonderful time in this restaurant called Giacomini's, and I still talk to the family who operates it, and they're just wonderful people. I do a little consulting for them. So that's really how I started food business. And I had to cook Italian guys, even though I worked as a waiter. Shift started at 11 o'clock. I'd come in and the morning, and the boys taught me how to cook Italian. So basically that was my foundation, delicatessen and Italian food. That's how I started. I was probably between 18 and 20. Yeah, I was a senior in high school, and then I went to Akron University for the first 2 years. And when I was in Akron U, I was working in their restaurants, and I always had a nice bundle of ones in my pocket because I made from the tips, yeah. And there was no $5 tips; it was all $1 and $2 tips. So you had to wait at a lot of tables to make a buck.
Yeah,
But I did.
that's cool. That's wonderful. So Dennis, what's your favorite part of the hospitality business?
Well, people ask me all the time, now that I've sold all the restaurants, do you miss it? That's the key question. And my answer is I cease to have fun in the restaurant. I cease to have fun. I used to have a lot of fun with my restaurants because, you know, I have like a little bit of a sadistic humor, right? And you have to have that in delicatessen business because the customer, the delicatessen customer, and that's code word for Jewish people, they're very difficult. They're very difficult to please because generally in the delicatessen business, they have a food sickness. And so the three most questions for them were, number one, is it lean? Is it lean? The second question, I want it hot. Burn my mouth out. I want it hot. And the third, don't sit me by a draft. So those three things are the most important thing for the delicatessen customers. So, and I had a lot of fun on the floor. I always was kidding around. I'll tell you an interesting story. A lady came in and we forgot her pickle on her corned beef sandwich, and she complained bitterly. So the next day I took a 5-gallon bucket of pickles and took them and put them on her front porch. So that's the kind of shtick I did. And that's what, and I had a lot of fun. I had a lot of fun doing it. And it was a real nice, and I did that for many, many years. And of course, on our restaurants, the front door said, "This is a bad place for a dive, and critics not welcome." They call me Denny 2-star because I never got better than 2 stars. So people say, "Well, our restaurant was edgy." So I kept focus. In our restaurants, it was details, details, details. I always my presentations were always unusual. They were abundant, and people really came. We established such a continual clientele. People came back and back because we served quality food. For many years, we pumped our own corned beef and pastrami. Everything we made was from scratch. And as a side note, Sanka used to be in little packages. So whenever I joined Hyatt, I talked to the coffee company and I said, because we had all these Hyatt details. So I had to make brewable Sanka. And I'm the one that created brewable Sanka in this country. There was everything was in a packet. And also I initiated the squeeze bottle mustards, all the mustards in squeeze bottles, because what I saw in my restaurant was we used to put the grape poupon and the mustard on the table, and I would watch our customers put a spoon into the mustard, put it in their mouth, and put it back in the mustard. And I called the mustard guys and I said, "Listen, we got to put this in squeeze bottles." And they did. And the guy that initiated that was Beaver Mustard out of Oregon. And he's the first one that did the mustard with me. So I'm real proud of that.
That's quite a story. It's too bad you don't have get some royalties from all that production of the squeeze bottles.
You know what? You're right about that. And the guy's name was Gene Beasy. And I said, "Gene, come on, man." And I never got a nickel from him. I got to thank you very much. A lot of good that did me. Thank you. Right.
You got a lot of nachas, right?
Yeah, right. Which means a lot of praise, but nothing in your pocket, right? And I think the most important thing I did is I think the most important game changer for me is when I came to the Fairmont in 1967 and Dick Swig hired me. That was the game changer because because if you can make it in the restaurant business in San Francisco, you damn near can make it anywhere. So even though he was very difficult to work for, it was well worth it. And I had a very exciting time at the Fairmont where I worked as first I was food and beverage director of the hotel at a very young age. I think I was 26 or 27 years old. And then I eventually became vice president and ran all the hotels. And the Fairmont was a very exciting deal for me because at that time, it was the finest hotel in the city. There was no Ritz, there was no Four Seasons. There was just the Fairmont, the Mark, and then eventually Stanford Court. Then there was the St. Francis and the Sheraton. So we pretty much had to market to ourselves. Those were important. Those were important factors in my development in my career.
So what were the biggest challenges you had working at the Fairmont? Because I know I did a small stint at the Fairmont for my when I went to Cornell Hotel School. Yeah.
One of the biggest challenge I had is not coming to work for Sims, because your father tried to recruit me every month. He would call me, and I remember I came over to his house in Marin County with my wife Janice, and we came in through the back door. And I said to Janice, I said, someday we're going to have a house like this. So your father gave me a lot of incentive, but he was a great guy. He really was. He'd call me all the time to come work for Sims. And the first thing I would have done is fire your ass.
Yeah, I'm glad you didn't make it over because then that
Right?
would be history.
You know that
Yeah,
the story,
right.
the story that's coming, right? You want to hear the
Yeah,
story?
well, yeah, let's hear the story. Let's hear the story.
Well, I had a restaurant called Max's Son, and in the back we did a barbecue. It was a big restaurant, so we made the back room barbecue because we couldn't fill up the rest of the restaurant. So it was called Mr. Bones. And you heard about it, and either you or your father called me. You wanted to check it out, right? You did check it out. You took pictures of everything, and then you put it into Zims, right? And I was so mad at you, Steve, for all these years. But today I'm forgiving you. I'm forgiving you today, because my wife said you shouldn't hold a grudge, but I don't believe that. So the grudge is over. You're forgiven.
Thank you. That I did get a lot of ideas from you, and we put them in the restaurant, and they worked really well. We used a one of those Chinese smokers, and because we didn't have a lot of extra room to do the hanging of the ribs and the chicken, etc. And it was a good add-on to our restaurant. But you definitely, I learned a lot from your merchandising expertise, which was very strong. You've got a very unique, unique, outstanding personality. Who did you get your personality from?
My father, my father, he was a wise guy. So we had a restaurant called the Corned Beef Center in Akron, Ohio. So a guy comes in and he said, I want extra onion on my sandwich. My father took the two ends off the onion and put the whole onion on the sandwich. That's the kind of guy he was. And he was a wise guy. I got that from him. So yeah.
No, it's a nice thing. It's a nice trait to have for sure. I'm sure it served you well in your successful career.
I'll tell you something important. When I was hired by Hyatt, Donald Pritzker and Skip Friend hired me. Now, Donald Pritzker, for your information, his son is J.B. Pritzker, the governor of Illinois. That was Donald, and he died at 39 years old on the tennis court because he was overweight. He would go down to Critican, lose 40 pounds, come back, gain it back. But anyway, he left it with something very important, and it was leave them laughing. So my management style became a humorous one. And because if he'd call you in his office and he didn't like something and he dressed you down, when you walked out the door, you were laughing. And that is, I think of all the things I learned, that was maybe one of the most important things. I have fun in what you do in your job, because the restaurant business can be a lot of fun if you handle it properly.
Yes. Interesting you mentioned Donald Pritzker. He was talking to my father about purchasing Zims, and
Really? Donald
he
was?
wanted yeah, he was. And he wanted us to actually, run some of, I guess, his coffee shop operations in the hotels. But because we were union, he decided that the numbers didn't work out. So it didn't, but I know Dad had some very interesting, memorable experiences talking to Don, and it was a heartbreak when he died at such an early age.
Must have been before my time.
Yeah, it could have been. Yeah. Dennis, what are your strongest areas of expertise, and how do you deal with those strong areas to overcome your major challenges of the business?
Well, I think what did me well is attention to detail. For example, when I worked for Hyatt, I used to serve a cup of coffee. It was with we would put shaved chocolate. We'd serve it with fresh whipped cream. We would do all the little details. Like when I had Max's, there were 4 or 5 mustards that were placed on the table. We served hot breads. As a matter of fact, when we started, we used to use the bagel sticks from House of Bagel, toast them fresh. It was just the details of what we served that were so important. And when I was with Hyatt, we had so many we did so many of these things that the PR people picked it up and they called it a touch of Hyatt. And I think they still use that even to this day, because there were, like at Max's, no one ever served brewed iced tea. We would put 2 tea bags in the hot water in the pot and serve a big 24-ounce glass of ice, and people got fresh iced tea at the table. And that was pretty novel, and it still is. And it was a real pain in the ass to deliver. So there's a lot of detail. And I also treated my employees very well. And even to this day, people walk up to me and thank me for their career. And even though they may not be in the food business, the people that work for me liked me. And I never in all my years working, and it's been maybe 60 years or whatever it is, I've never been sued by an employee, never. And I've never been accused of a harassment act, nothing. So I'm very proud of that.
That's quite an accomplishment. Yeah, really accomplishment. It certainly is. So, of all the many accomplishments that you've achieved throughout your career, what single accomplishment is most meaningful to you?
Well, I think 2 things. One is the development of the Hyatt Food and Beverage program, and I did it in 7 years. I started with Hyatt when they had 17 motor hotels, and when Don and Skip hired me, they expected me all by myself to give them 17 Fairmonts, and that wasn't gonna happen. But I developed a lot of specialty restaurants because that's kind of what I knew to do. And back then, there really wasn't any competition for me because the people that ran the Sheratons, the Westons, the Hiltons, they all had their head up their ass. And they were all run by chefs. The chef ruled the roost, and the management was scared of them. So what did you get? You got the food that a chef would like. And that doesn't necessarily mean what the market wants. Because back in those days, the chefs in these major hotels, they were carving ice and they were going to culinary competition. And my guys at Hyatt, we were keeping our eye on the beans, crisp bacon, crisp toast, nice eggs, the coffee shop. That's where the customer lived, in the coffee shop. So what I did is I basically made this coffee shop a specialty restaurant. So we ended up with two restaurants at every hotel, one a specialty coffee shop, and I was the first one to put a buffet in a coffee shop. And that was very popular. I think COVID killed it, but we had beautiful buffets in our coffee shop where the customer could help themselves. It took the edge off the service. And then I created specialty restaurants for Hyatt. Probably the most famous was Ginsberg and Wong. That was a Jewish Chinese combination in Cherry Hill. It lasted for 20 years. You don't have restaurants and hotels that last for 20 years. And then I did the rotisserie restaurants. They were called Hugo's Rotisserie, TJ Peppercorn. That came from my experience with the Somerset Hotel in my time I worked in Boston. Those restaurants were called Beef and Bird, and they specialized in duck. And also I got a chance to work with Jim Nasicas, who was the most brilliant hotel man. He and Peter Goldman were the best hotel men in America. And Nasicas was brilliant, and he did this 5-way serve this duck 5 ways. So I picked up on that, but I made it into an open kitchen with a rotisserie, and it was a huge hit. And I must have done 15 or 20 of those restaurants, and every single one of them was successful. And the most notable one, the first one, was in Lake Tahoe, Hugo's Rotisserie down by the lake in that circular building. It's now, I think, called the Lone Star, but it was immensely successful, and it was. And so I took I made I made the hotels like freestanding restaurants, like they were independent, right? Because the other hotel guys, they were living out of the Escoffier cookbook, and I had nothing to do with that. Everything we did was innovative, and I hired a bunch of young guys because I was young, a bunch of young guys, very spirited, and we pulled it off. It was remarkable. It was remarkable, and I even created a restaurant in Boston after we had a restaurant in San Francisco called the Empress of China. So the Hyatt in Cambridge, I put a Chinese restaurant called the Empress on top of it, and it was run by my mentor Sonny Chin, who was a master Cantonese chef that worked with me at the Polynesian Village at the Somerset Hotel in probably 1965, and he taught me how to cook Chinese and how to work with a cleaver and bone the chicken. He was sensational. And so those were really kind of important things that was before Max's. So, and I got to tell you that the Hyatt people, 50 years later, they still treat me. They're the gift that keeps on giving. I get family rates. They treat me. I've only there 7 years, but they treat me like I'm still an employee. There's in Chicago. Hyatt built a corporate headquarters, and they have a Hall of Fame in Chicago. I'm on it, and I provided a lot of the information for it. And I'm so proud of being on that Hall of Fame in Chicago. If I could go back to work, I could go back to work for the Pritzkers anytime, just for my seniority. I would do it pro bono. But since I'm 86 years old, I don't think they're interested. I'm too much of a workman comp for them. They don't want me to fall down on a job.
Those are great experiences. I doubt it since you're such in good shape. For those of you who don't know, Dennis plays tennis, singles tennis every day, and has been doing so since he's been like 15 years old. So he's not your typical 86-year-old. So if you could change any event or decision that you made in your career, what would that change be and why?
Well, I certainly wouldn't have gone to Chicago. That was probably the biggest screw up of our career, because you think the grass is always greener because they had tip credit and it was cheaper. It was a big mistake. So that was the biggest mistake I made. But I've had a lot of successes, so you have to offset. And the other big mistake I made was doing Max's Diamond Grill across from the ballpark, but 9/11 hurt it. But I think it would have failed anyway because I did the wrong concept. So those, I think, were the two biggest mistakes I made. I made others, but those were notable.
Well, the food and beverage industry is definitely ever changing, and so what do you see as the future for the food and beverage business in California?
Well, I got to tell you, you got to give a lot of kudos to the people in the restaurant business today. They're so innovative. The chefs are innovative. The owners are innovative. They're really terrific restaurant, and they're popping up all over the place. So the development of restaurants is sensational right now. Even the fast food guys are come every day. You see something different. You see the advertisements, and you're kind of flabbergasted of these guys that think of these new food items. Well, I'll give you an example. Look at Shake Shack. That's Danny Meyer, so he's a brilliant restaurant guy. So if you go there, you got such innovative food. Look at Chipotle. It's outstanding, and there's a lot of these new concepts that are taking hold. And I can tell you that the Indian culture, they're producing Indian pizza restaurants. There's a huge Indian influence coming in this country, not just with Indian food, but they're taking their cuisine and they're making it into other things. So it's quite interesting. I think it's terrific. But the only thing I'm unhappy with is it's so goddamn expensive.
If I could interject for a minute, that's a real problem for the industry because they cannot raise their prices commensurate with their increased costs, and if they do, they're going to go out of business because disposable income is a real issue, for most places in America.
Look, Wendy's just announced they're closing 100 restaurants, right? Specialties, they were doing a tremendous job. They went bankrupt. I don't understand why they went bankrupt, but 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 you think that you've got a successful restaurant company, and all of a sudden, uh, all of a sudden it collapses. And there's a good example of Specialties is a real good example of collapse in the Bay Area, and they did a nice job. They did a nice job.
They did a very nice job.
Yeah.
So Dennis, if you were advising a seasoned restaurant manager that was considering owning his first restaurant, what advice would you give him?
Don't do it. Don't do it. Don't do it unless you establish a budget and you double it. You double it because I have an expression I learned from a friend of mine in Beverly Hills who made our uniforms. He says, "Liars figure, but figures don't lie." You need to double it and then reserve another 6 months for losses. And you must really understand leases, which you understand, because a new restaurateur gets trapped. They get trapped with the assignment clause. They can't assign it. They get big CPIs. They got continuous operation clauses. Something happens, you got to keep operating. So leases are very important. If you're failing, can you assign it reasonably with the landlord approval? There's so many things that go into it. Just because you have a recipe for lasagna doesn't mean you can open an Italian restaurant. But people are very naive when it comes to opening restaurants. So you have to have very deep pockets, and you really have to have people that can execute. And that's becoming more and more of a problem because we're having difficulty finding people that can execute. So
Sure.
let's put it this way: unless you have deep pockets, unless you have a sponsor or someone that can back you up, you can do a pop-up. You can pop up all day and night, but you can't make a living doing pop-ups.
So is there a formula that you recommend as far as how much working capital a new owner operator should have? Should it be like 6 months worth of payroll, or
Yeah,
is there some formula that you?
I don't have a formula. All I know is you need a lot of money. You need a lot of money, and you need more than you think, because you have to be able to withstand things out of your control. The 9/11s, the recessions, the wars. They default in Greece on their bonds, and it affects what we do here. There's a lot of factors that are out of your control. So should you do it? You just have to make sure that all the stars have to line up. If any of the stars don't line up, don't do it.
So let's tell the audience about this new book you're about to publish, and when it will be available, and how do they purchase a copy of it?
I wrote a memoir, and it took me about 5 years to write it. 3 years ago, we sold. I had a commissary in South San Francisco, and I had a big office in a commissary, and I had an administrative assistant. So I was writing a book, and she would computerize it and everything. And then it sat for a while, and there's a section in it, an anti-Semitic section in it, and I'll tell you the story about it that kept me from publishing the book, because I didn't want to get sued. So in 1963, after I came out of the service, ran the Fort McNair Officers Club, I went for an interview with a very prominent food and beverage hospitality company in the Washington, D.C. area. And I went for the interview. I had my Hartschaffner and Mark suit with a little tie. It had my initial on it. I looked very, very nice. And I had a resume, right? I go to the HR guy, and he said, "Dennis," he said, "you're perfect for us. So let me call in the vice president of food and beverage." I'm not mentioning names. The vice president of food and beverage comes in. He took a look at my resume, and he says, "Berkowitz, we don't hire those kind." I heard him say it, right? So and I named, and in my original manuscript, I put the name of the company, and then I thought about it. I said, I took it out. I sanitized it. So no one knows the name of the company because it's still in business and they're very prominent. They're very prominent. So I didn't want to have any problem legally. And I believe they probably have corrected themselves after that. I'm sure they have. But I'll tell you, the sequel to the story, it's in the book called Grudges and Revenge. And what happened was in 1974, I won the silver plate, which is big award, big industry award for the hotel food and beverage guy of the year. It was in a Conrad Hilton, 1,000 people in the audience. California, here I come down, I get my medal, right? And I'm with my wife Janice. So now we're in the elevator in the Conrad, and we're coming down from the ballroom, right? And in the elevator is the HR guy from this company, right? And the vice president, who said, "We don't hire this kind," right? He said, "Dennis," he said, "you've done a fabulous job with Hyatt. Why don't you come work for us?" I said, "You know what? I try to come work for you."
Yeah. So if they want to get your book, what's the title of the book,
okay.
and how do they get how did
Okay, the name of the book is Eat, Darling, Eat. And it's really a humorous novel of the food and beverage business. And it will be available in about 2 weeks on Amazon. All right. And it talks about all my experience in the food business, but in a humorous way. It will put a smile, trust me, it will put a smile on your face when you read it, because it tells about my initial years. It talks about the Sonesta family, that's HCA, that's Sonesta, the Swig family, the Pritzker family, who are fantastic. I got letters from Jay Pritzker. That's Jay Pritzker is Grant Park. He's Mr. Chicago. Gives you all these experiences, and also talks about all the fun things that happened. Like at Max's son, I had all these fortune cookies were funny. I had Max's laws. There's a lot of stuff in there that will make you smile. It's like funny thing happened on the way to the forum, right? It's all in there, and it's the good, the bad, and the ugly. But I think it's going to be an enjoyable read for people, and it'll be available in about 2 weeks.
good? I look forward to getting it.
Yeah, well, it's going to be on Amazon. I think you can maybe order it in the bookstore, but Amazon is where you should go for it. It's called Eat, Darling, Eat. Yeah.
Okay. Future Dealmaker show co-hosts for 2026 include, in March, Brian Bennett. He's the founder and operator of Bennett Hospitality Group, which operates Bennett's Kitchen Bar Market in Roseville, Bennett's American Cooking in Sacramento, and Bennett's Westside Grill in Rockland. Prior to developing Bennett's, Brian was the founding partner of Paul Martin's American Grill in Newport Beach and the vice president of operations for Chevy's Fresh Mex with over 100 restaurants. In April, a gentleman I think that Dennis knows is Faz Peroshi. Faz has been a well-known chef owner. Yeah, Faz is quite a character. He's been the chef owner of many restaurants throughout the Bay Area for several decades. Currently, Faz is the owner of the famous MacArthur Park restaurant in Palo Alto and Faz Restaurant Catering in San Jose. We'll be announcing our lineup of additional Restaurant Dealmaker co-hosts for 2026 in the near future. So thank you for joining us today. Dennis, again, thank you for the very colorful and informative presentation.
Well, I hope I put a smile on your
And
face. Thank you.
Oh, yes. And if you want to get in touch with me, I can be reached again, steve@restaurantrealty.com, or I can be reached toll free at 888-995-9701. Take care of yourself and take care of others and stay well. Thank you for joining us today.